Welcome back to Legally Judgy. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Alexa.
Hey girl, let's get right into our little bulletin board.
Woody woot.
So, as a reminder for everybody who doesn't know, we have our Patreon where we have uncut episodes, our community hub that's got some behind the scenes footage, polls, and more. And we've got mini-sodes there. So if you don't get enough of legal content on this episode and all of our former episodes, you can go there for more. So check us out on Patreon. The link is literally on every single platform we are on because we are two desperate ass bitches.
Very thirsty.
Yeah.
Slurp, slurp. We also need to announce, my dear friend, we're going to have a little winter vacations.
Yes, you're right.
A little extra time off for us.
Yep.
Which we know is going to be heartbreaking to our judges. It's kind of heartbreaking to us, but we need the R&R. I think.
Just a little bit. Just a few naps.
So this is going to be the last episode of the year. We will miss you greatly, but don't worry, we will see you next year. Which I actually hate when people say that because it sounds so dramatic. It's like Susan, it's 1 week. We'll see you next week, Susan.
It's always somebody in like account, like what's that thing called, accounts payable, who's like, can't wait to see you in the new year, and you're like, oh my god, fuck off.
It would be the accountants who are like, the fiscal year is over.
Exactly.
So next year, it's like it's very dramatic. Yeah. So we're taking 2 weeks off instead of our typical 1 week off.
So like Alexa said, we're taking 2 weeks off. Our first episode back will be Tuesday, January 11th. We will come back refreshed, rested, looking super cute, though you can't mostly see us through these episodes. So
that we look super cute while we do all this when you can't see us.
Love that for us.
Our last episode of the year. We don't want to introduce any new topics. We got to save something for our peoples in 2022, but we do want to go over some big topics we've covered this year and give some updates because I feel like there's a couple topics we've covered this year that have had meaningful updates since.
All the hot goss.
Do you want to start us out with the scamming Wizard of Oz, aka
of course.
Jen Shah?
Of course. So Jen Shah, as background, as a reminder, she is a star on the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City on Bravo and is married to a football coach. Jen is like, as we've talked about on the episode, she was the one who was always super fancy, super over the top. She's not humble at all about the lifestyle that she leads. And so all of this kind of came to a head when in March 2021, she and her assistant, Stuart Smith, were arrested for allegedly conspiring to commit wire fraud and launder money in connection with the telemarketing scam. And so interestingly enough, and probably making Andy Cohen very happy, Jen was arrested while filming for the Real Housewives. And so the whole group of women was basically leaving for a ski trip, and she essentially flees to go back home where she's then arrested. Like that, basically as she pulls up to her house, the FBI and Homeland Security and like other cops and things were already at her house ready to put handcuffs on her.
Which is crazy to me that Bravo had been kind of sneak peeking that scene, right? They really played it up. Bravo's so ecstatic that this is happening, which is problematic in and of itself, but we won't get into that right now. But I want to point out how when I watched it, I was like, oh shit, that's not scripted. Like it is clear that Jen really thought she was going to do this little, housewives filming thing and did not expect the FBI, Homeland Security, everybody to be coming for her. Like the moments watching her take that phone call. And the thing for me is, damn, this woman can lie. This is my own personal opinion. I feel like because when the women asked what's going on, she, without skipping a beat, goes, my husband is in the hospital. He has internal bleeding. Deadpan delivery.
Which is also so fucked up because I'm one of those superstitious people, and I think you are too, where like I like to have an excuse, right? I like to get out of things. There are a lot of times I just want to stay on the couch in my fleece blankie, and I'm like, what's a good excuse that I can use to not go to this obligation that I have? But like I try to refrain from putting illnesses on people that are not real because I'm always like, if I say it, it's going to happen.
Yeah. I agree. And also like, don't joke about that because also, and like, I don't want to judge somebody for reacting in a way that I don't think is the way they should react, but this is legally judging. I guess judging is part of what we do on here. If my wife had internal bleeding, if I suddenly got a call and she was in the hospital with internal bleeding, best believe I'm not going to be calm and just be like, everything's fine. No, you don't have to stay ahead. I'd be like, I don't even have time to talk to any of you guys. I'm out. Like, you might not even get an explanation from me. Right?
She literally like stopped and told everybody and gave hugs and kisses and was like, I'll see you later. Like, not a tear was shed. You know, my hot mess ass self, it's going to be snot and tears for days.
My husband! Come in! No, you would just react with emotion. And that's why also we can't help it. We know that wasn't the case, right? We know that he wasn't in the hospital with internal bleeding. So it's easier in retrospect to be watching that scene and go, wow, you came up, that was your lie. That was like your go-to. And so quickly. Not that we expected her to be like, oh yeah, actually guys, I'm in being investigated for, this huge telemarketing scheme where allegedly I defrauded like all these old elderly people. But you just so quick to be like, my husband's in the hospital.
I know.
All that I'm bringing that up because I think that's super sus. And it doesn't make me want to trust her when she says she's not guilty.
Well, you were not the only one who does not trust her. So going back, Jen and her assistant Stuart, like I said, were arrested, and they were each charged with one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiring to commit money laundering in connection with running this national telemarketing scheme that I mentioned that essentially targeted elderly and computer illiterate people. And so allegedly, Jen and Stuart, plus a number of other folks, victimized 10 or more, aka hundreds actually, of people over the age of 55, which started back in 2002. But it's actually worth noting that Stuart goes on to later say that his involvement started back in 2008.
Ouch.
Yeah, so lots of years in progress now. And so Jen and Stuart are they're in what's called the Tier A group of conspirators, which basically means they're the most culpable. And so the government, when putting together their case, grouped the defendants based on how involved or how bad their crimes were, how many people like they had personally interacted with, etc. And so because Jen and Stuart allegedly were involved with like the worst and the most of it, they were put in the Tier A group. And so the government even goes on to basically say that they claimed that Jen and Stuart orchestrated like this entire thing in a very broad scheme. So as a result of these charges and all the claims the government is making, Stuart was looking at 70 years in jail and Jen was looking at 50 years in jail. And so as backup kind of like for some of the claims the government was putting forth, besides like the hard evidence in terms of, various records and evidence, prosecutors also said that they really flaunted their lavish lifestyles when it was all a fraud. And then it was all, in quotes, at the expense of vulnerable, often elderly, working class people. And even said that Jen and Stuart continued to scam people after being charged. So all this kind of results in the initial hearing after Jen got arrested on TV. And so her and Stu plead not guilty, naturally. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell the folks where things are now?
Yeah. Things have changed, Nicole. I don't know if you're
tell me about
it. A couple things have changed. So November last year, Stu switches his plea from not guilty to guilty. Well, yep. that really was I built up a lot, and then. Do
you want to say it again? You just want. Okay, girl. It's the end of year.
No, it's okay. Just let the people see. I'm a little imperfect sometimes.
So let's just restate. He pleads guilty. Most recently,
switches his plea from not guilty to guilty when he appears before the judge last month in November, which is insane. Mm-hmm. So he pleads guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. And of course, we don't have a direct line with him yet, so we'll speculate about.
Couldn't text him.
If you're listening, feel free to drop us a line at Legally Judgy, and we will get into it about why you changed your mind. So we're just going to speculate here. I think, you and I have talked about this. I think a lot of this is because he probably actually was guilty. He knew, like you said, that he was facing up to 70 years in prison. Yep. And there was more mounting evidence. Other people were going down and being found guilty and being charged. And he knew that they were coming for him. And in order to get a reduced sentence from 70 years to, less than 70 years, whatever he can work out with the government, he's just agreeing to basically comply with the government, help give them information, just admit to it, avoid the whole trial, and in return get a lesser sentence. Mm-hmm. I think that's why. And I do, when this first hit, I remember thinking, oh shit, Jen's gonna go down if she's involved, but I can't help but think she is. because I bet a big part of what the government wants from him is evidence against Jen.
And I mean, listen, I think if for you who've been watching the season, I think as things have been rolled, right, because there have been a number of episodes actually before he changed his plea, she is not like the most supportive person. And for somebody who was on all of last season with her and was supposed to be like her right hand and her best friend and her assistant, she kind of quickly changes her tune. So that being said, like, I wonder if that kind of created some ripples in the water, and if he started to question like how loyal to her he actually should and needed to be.
Right. I think so too. I mean, that happens a lot too when you have multiple defendants where, you're going to try to, as the government, the prosecution, you're going to try to get to each one of them and see, okay, who can essentially break and stop being loyal to each other, who's going to snitch. And then once the other one finds out the other one snitched, then that person's going to snitch too. And then they kind of start pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree also. Her behavior on there is just not good. It's like, how do you praise this man and then all of a sudden you start tearing him down?
I know.
Anyways, it's worth noting though that from what we can find, he hasn't actually named Jen in his plea. It seemed like a more general statement. He told the court that he, in quotes, knowingly and intentionally discussed and engaged with other individuals to develop a plan or operation to obtain money by false representations, end quote. He also said that he was aware that they were misleading customers and selling them services that were of no value or benefit to them. Mm-hmm. So very general, but I would be surprised if outside of all this, he doesn't end up naming her specifically.
Yeah.
But that's TBD.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be sentenced on March 3rd. He's currently out on bail. So presumably the government didn't think he was too much of a flight risk, meaning that he could leave, Utah, even the United States, get out so that he doesn't have to come back and, essentially go back to prison. Because essentially, I think he will serve some time. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine they let him off with no time, although sometimes depending on the plea, people do get off without having to serve time for less egregious offenses.
Yeah.
That is not going to be the case here. What about you? You want to update us on Jen?
Yeah, so on the other side of things, Jen's team recently filed a motion to dismiss the fraud indictment charge against her. And Jen alleges basically that her right to a fair trial was compromised by the Hulu documentary, The Housewife and the Shah Shocker, and said that private info was made public by two of the Homeland Security agents who made an appearance on the show. And so a couple of weeks ago, basically in December, the judge denies this motion and said that the agents who made statements in the show were about telemarketing fraud generally and overall, and they kind of made some general references to the lifestyles of the people involved in their investigation, but didn't make any specific enough claims about Jen to have compromised her ability to have a fair trial. Mm-hmm. And so it's worth noting as well, the prosecutors also pointed out how Jen continues to make public appearances, both on The Real Housewives, right? Because there's obviously this new season, and talking about the charges herself while she does like various interviews with, social media platforms and entertainment channels, etc. And so I think that dilutes like what she's saying about, information being out and her not being able to have a fair trial when she's doing the same thing that those investigators essentially did.
It's only fair when it's her opinion, Nicole. Come on.
Oh, for sure. Naturally, when she's defending herself and throwing Stewart under the bus. So Jen's trial is now set to begin in March of 2022. And so I think to your point, right? Like, I'm actually really curious to see how Stewart's plea of now guilty is going to impact Jen, and how hard it's going to be for her to basically attack his character when she goes to trial, kind of given all of this recent background and like the new happenings that we've got here.
That's literally what I was thinking about too, because, this is something that we talked about when we first covered her on the episode. Was like, Stewart was like her best friend. It seemed like her number one assistant, literally, and like her BFF. She said how much she relied on him,
mm-hmm.
how helpful he was with her businesses. And these are the types of things that I'm thinking, okay, now that he's pled guilty, and presumably, this is yet to be determined, but I think that it will come out. He's going to implicate her specifically.
Mm-hmm.
How is she going to handle it? How are you going to balance the fact that you said that he was this great guy and now he's guilty? My only thing is, I'm thinking maybe you say he deceived you. You had no idea he was doing these things behind your back. But if he's running your businesses, how do you still plead ignorance at the least?
Right.
I guess let's just presume she's not guilty of these things. She's then very, very careless, negligent. because she should have been paying attention to her businesses more. She should have been overseeing what he was doing. But I'm just not buying it. I mean, I can't imagine now that he's pled guilty. For me, it looks bad for her.
And as we've talked about, right, in other episodes, even if she didn't necessarily know, but he's an employee of hers, she could still be liable through, you know, various legal theories that basically say, like, as an employer or somebody who like supervises other, you have some kind of liability for the things that they do on your behalf.
Yes. Yeah. It's like we don't want to get too dorky, but an agency, right?
Yep.
Which employer-employee is a form of agency, essentially meaning that like you said, employer is responsible for the employee's actions so long as, and there's like these factors, right? Has to be like during work hours. It's not like employers are responsible for what you do on Saturday night. If you're not working Saturday night and you're at the club, like that doesn't count. But like if it's Monday morning and you're supposed to be on the job and you are on the job and you do something, then the employer is going to be liable. So obviously there are facts that need to come out, but just personally, my opinion is that it's looking worse and worse for her, especially as other people are going down around her. And I just feel like her lawyer is trying to get everything dismissed because of a Hulu documentary is also not a great look. The PR, everything is just not looking good. I'm just not happy. I'm just gonna be honest.
But of course, we will stay tuned. Like I said, the trial sets begin in March, so I'm sure a lot will come out along the way. I mean, query if she even pleads guilty herself before then, as like the evidence continues to mount against her. But we'll stay tuned. We will also stay tuned to her marriage to Coach Shah. Yep. Jen recently did an interview and basically said that all of this has put a strain on their marriage, not surprisingly. And she said the two actually considered divorce recently because her husband thought that he wasn't being a positive influence in her life. All of which I think means that a divorce is coming, which I'm sure will be just in time for season 3 of The Real Housewives, because usually these things happen like the first day of the next season. So
got to have a good storyline going into a new season.
Yeah.
Also, like, what a way to spin this, right? Like, she's on trial for allegedly conspiring to defraud hundreds of elderly people. And the reason for the divorce is because he's not being a positive influence in her life. I'm just like, what?
They're just an odd couple. Like, they were always a very odd couple to me, like the conversations that they had and the things that they would say to each other. I don't understand.
It almost reminded me of like a parent-child relationship. Like the way that she would talk to him, it was like she was like a young, immature, naive kid being like, Sharif, what should I do with this problem? And I'm like, what are you talking about, lady? You're a full-grown adult. You don't know how to, like the nature of what she would, like, how do I have more patience? I'm like, yeah, girl, you are, I actually don't know how old she is, but older.
She has to be in her 40s, 50s, let's say.
That's generous. Yeah. 40s, generous. 40s is generous. But yeah, possibly. Anyway, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Speaking of divorces.
Got him. Who's getting divorced?
Dr. Dre is really celebrating these days, my friend. So to recap for anybody who has not yet listened to our Dr. Dre and Nicole Young divorce episode, which I feel like was a pretty good one. We really dug into divorces in California. Dr. Dre and Nicole Young were going through some divorce issues. And I say that because Nicole Young, Dr. Dre's wife of 24 years, had filed for divorce from him in the summer of 2020, and they had been battling it out ever since. And when I say battling out, I mean World War III.
It is Game of Thrones style over at that house.
Really bad in the Young household, or lack thereof a household, I guess. So she cites irreconcilable differences, which basically means that a person and their spouse can't get along anymore. And legally, it typically means that the filing spouse isn't seeking to prove that the other person did something wrong. Essentially a no-fault divorce when you hear that. And if you want more details, go listen to that episode. It's a good one.
It was a good one.
Especially if you need some divorce tips. I mean, there's some nuggets in there. So she asks for a ton of money, like a lot of money. She essentially comes out with a bang. She says she wants $2 million a month in spousal support fees, which is crazy. But of course, Dr. Dre comes back and he goes, we have a prenup, meaning a contract that two people enter into and sign before they get married, that typically says what each person owns and what their property rights are going to be if and when they divorce, sadly, but you got to account for that. And each state has its own laws about enforcement and validity of the prenup. Essentially, though, the agreement has to be fair, and that's going to be based on the circumstances of the couple. So moral of the story here is, if you are entering into a prenup or thinking about getting one, make sure you have a lawyer, and make sure your future spouse has a lawyer, because that's going to be a huge thing courts are going to look at in terms of making sure that it was fair. Because if everybody has a lawyer, people are going to assume, all right, you both had advocates, you guys are good. Anyway, go listen to that episode if you want more details. Anyways, back to Dr. Dre and Nicole. It gets very, very messy. Bit of a trigger warning here. But, she claims at certain points that he was physically abusive. She pointed to his history of being physically abusive toward women. This doesn't make it better, but at some point she serves him at his grandma's funeral with
very messy.
It's so bad. It's so bad. She allegedly embezzled money from one of his businesses
in like a couple $100,000. It wasn't like it was not a small amount.
She didn't just like go into his wallet and was like, I need a 20. She also tried to subpoena several of his mistresses.
Yep.
Very, very messy. And during the summer, he was actually ordered to pay her $300,000 a month, aka $3.5 million a year in spousal support, and to cover her expenses for her health insurance, security, and maintenance of 2 of their houses. They have many others, but just 2. And the order was supposed to remain in place until she remarried, died, or, for the court order. That's where we last left off, my friend. That was a lot. So if you could take it from here and tell the peoples where we're at now.
I got your back.
Thank you.
I got your back. So in November, Dr. J reportedly goes back to court and reveals to the court that his entire estate isn't as big as many may have thought it was, and that he only has, just bear with me, he only has $183 million in cash, $269 million in property and assets, and $6 million in stocks. Only. How bad do you feel for him?
I feel terrible. Like, maybe we should give him some money.
Should we start a what's that thing? GoFundMe? Yeah.
GoFundMe. Just in time for the holidays.
Yeah.
Okay. And like, this is very wealthy, but I do have to say, on the flip side, people have been speculating that he's worth 800 million to even over $1 billion, probably closer to when he sold his Beats stock, sold it to Apple. But still, I mean, we're looking at about half of what people thought he had. I mean, for 450 million, I'm not feeling too sorry for him, right? That's approximately like where his wealth comes out to, but poor him. Sorry.
Well, it's fine. I loved it. I love the shade. So reportedly, Dr. Dre and Nicole recently reached a settlement where he'll pay her one big lump sum, as opposed to continuing these like monthly, payments that the court initially ordered. And so, of course, it's confidential. So it's really not clear how much she's getting, but people are speculating that she'll probably get a really big piece of his approximately $450 million fortune. I mean, partially because she's been around for so long, right? Like without a prenup, she'd probably be entitled to like 50% of most of these things, just given how marriage works. But, like we talked about in the episode, the Beats by Dr. Dre, like those were started while he was with Nicole. And so she was a pivotal part, even through his home life, of him building, that couple billion dollar like company for Apple, essentially.
Right.
So again, we're not really sure how much she's going to get, but she's going to get one big lump sum here. And so the agreement is still not signed. So things are like bound to change. But after it is, again, he'll no longer have to pay her the monthly spousal support the court initially ordered. And so, of course, in true messy Dr. Dre and Nicole fashion, a lot of this even came to light because Dr. Dre posted a picture on his Instagram recently that had balloons that spelled out divorced AF, or as fuck. And so what a way to celebrate the end of a beautiful marriage than divorce this fuck on Instagram.
The pettiness. It must have been, I mean, I hate when people settle because then we don't get to know what happened. And I'm so nosy. Like, I'm like, just give us a little crumb, like just over under, like tell us over under, like, would you give her, just
like a little like rough estimate.
Yeah. Like 10 million, 15, like wink twice, Dr. Dre, if it's more, or like, like, tell me, what did she get? But he obviously is happy about it, whatever this big lump sum is, to celebrate in this way. I'm sure he just wants to be done with it and not have it linger about like monthly, like the idea of having future monthly payments no matter what.
Yeah,
Just
agree.
pay
Like
it
at least
off.
just get it like done with
Yes.
now, and like you know that you're all set.
We don't have to interact anymore. Our 2 children together are grown, so
As fuck.
we're done.
Yeah.
Everything as fuck.
Everything is AF. Yeah. Just like Issa Rae on Insecure.
There you go.
Well, so we have other people who are celebrating lots and lots of happiness on Instagram. The posts may be a little bit more odd, but equally celebratory.
Britney.
So our girl Britney Spears.
Her posts really are very weird. I can't get over sending them to you. I'm so
you
intrigued.
send me like every single one at this point.
I'm so intrigued. I think I've become one of those people who start decoding like what she means. And I'm like, is it really Britney? Like, as if I know who the real Britney is. Like, Britney would never use that rose emoji. She only uses that, like, how would I know? I don't know what she actually uses. Anyway, what's going on with Britney?
Okay, so brief rundown. There was obviously, if you have not listened to the Britney episode, please go listen. There is so much context and history there that we cannot even begin to like really capture in this little rundown, but just a little taster. So Britney enters into a conservatorship in 2008, which impacted her finances, her personal life, and her medical decisions. So basically her entire fucking life.
Right.
And so as a reminder, a conservatorship is basically, so it happens after a court process that occurs if a state thinks that an adult is incapable of making their own decisions or is vulnerable to outside influence or manipulation. And if the court thinks that that's the case, they will assign an individual or an organization to handle certain affairs for that person and help them care for their life. And so typically this is used for like elderly people or individuals with disabilities who, have legally become adults, but still may be vulnerable in some ways. And so in California, where of course Britney is from, or at least not from, but she lives here and has been here for a while, there are 2 types of conservatorships. And so there's one that covers finances and estates, and then there's the other that covers personal matters like health and medical and well-being, etc. And so for a long time, the entire conservatorship was controlled by her dad, Jamie Spears. But at different points, there were other people and organizations that were appointed as co-conservators. But, it's worth noting that her dad was pretty constant and really only stepped down momentarily, or temporarily, I should say, when he was having some medical issues of his own. And so we don't want to get into the weeds too much. Again, go listen to that episode. But as a reminder, it was reported that Jamie was making approximately $16,000 a month as her conservator. And then in 2019, it's worth noting that her personal matters actually started to be managed by this woman, Jody Montgomery, while Jamie continued to oversee her finances and income only. So around the same time that Jody kind of comes into the picture, pressure really mounts, and there's a bunch, basically, and a ton of attention and scrutiny that's directed towards Britney even being in this conservatorship. And there's this movement called #FreeBritney that starts to pick up steam. And so in the summer of 2021, Britney actually starts to speak out publicly against the conservatorship and accuses her dad of exploiting her and starts asking for it to be terminated after like many, many years of silence. And to your point, there were a lot of people who, just as avidly as you follow her Instagram, were following her movements and like really scrutinizing her posts and whether it was her and whether the words were coming from her and whether people were basically forcing her to dance to make it seem like things were okay. And that really like kind of keeps building as like the New York Times documentary comes out and then she speaks.
Right.
Okay. So all of this being said, in July of 2021, Britney's court-appointed attorney resigns and she's finally able to choose her own attorney, whose name is Matthew Rosengart, and was a former prosecutor who worked with other big stars. And so this guy basically comes in like guns a fucking blazing and immediately asked Jamie to resign. Like that was the first paperwork that he basically filed and came out very quickly and said, like, my goal is to get Britney out of this conservatorship as soon as possible since she doesn't want to be in it.
Right.
And so after that, of course, things get a little murky. But in September, Jamie basically files to terminate the conservatorship altogether and not just his involvement. And he says that she's recently shown independence. I don't know what changed.
Seems weird
in those recent moments, but recently, in air quotes,
odd timing.
She has shown independence. So while this sounds nice, it may be because if by terminating the conservatorship altogether, it would allow Jamie to avoid investigation and get his legal fees paid by Britney before the conservatorship ended.
Mm-hmm.
And so her lawyer, Rosengart, also asked the judge to halt the termination instead replace Jamie with a CPA named John Zabel, because Zabel would then get access to all the privileged and confidential documents related to the trust and her finances, including like 13 years of financial records and, very importantly, communications between Jamie and the lawyers, which again, Zabel would get access to as a new conservator, and it would kind of reveal like what had really been going on behind the scenes for all these years, especially given some of the new claims by Britney and some of the claims by the people who, obviously like just fans, but had a reason to question the entire situation. And so it's really key to point out that if the conservatorship was terminated altogether, access to those documents would have been much harder. So it makes sense. We think that the lawyer, Rosengart, was like, listen, I want it to end. She wants it to end, but let's not end it just yet until we've made sure that we've done our due diligence into what's been going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, Rosengart doesn't want to lose access because he wants to look into Jamie's conduct, including claims that he was spying on Britney and had surveillance over her bedroom and phone for many years, and that he was controlling her social media, and he may have lied about amounts spent on her legal fees, management, etc. And so basically, Rosengart thinks that Jamie has committed a lot of misconduct and could possibly even face his own civil and criminal charges for what he's been doing. And so all of that kind of results in late September, the judge removing Jamie altogether from the conservatorship, but not terminating it just yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we've got now? That was a lot. We've got a lot. There's always so much when we go over Britney.
There's poor Britney. Hopefully after this, not too much more for her. But mid-November, so about a month and a half ago, Britney's conservatorship is actually terminated. So congratulations to Britney, finally. And essentially, it's important to note that it's important when this happens, especially because it's been years, right, that she's been in this conservatorship. Essentially, the court and her current conservators, so that's Jody Montgomery on the personal matters and John Zabel on the financial and estate matters, are putting a plan together for an orderly transition of all her affairs and responsibilities, since, that hadn't been within her control. So they don't want to just kind of dump it all on her, right? And then it overwhelm her and she be unable to manage everything. So it's important to work out this timeline and a plan for transition. And it's important to note here too, that this includes John, the CPA, that we previously mentioned, staying on in administrative capacity until January 19th, which is the date of the next hearing. As of now, of course, things can change, but as of now, January 19th, so that he can essentially set up a new trust for Britney and transfer her assets into that. So it's no longer the conservatorship's trust. It's now her own trust that she will be in full control of. And it's also worth noting here, what I found really interesting was that Jamie had requested, I think 5 days after the conservatorship was terminated, he asked for access from the court to see her estate plan. Again, even after the conservatorship terminated. And John, the new conservator, CPA, quickly objected to this. And both co-conservators, John and Jody, their attorneys contended that Jamie had planted a term in Britney's prior estate plan that would have required her to go through the courts to change it, which sounds really suspicious, right?
Very
because
sus.
As individuals, if you have an estate plan, you shouldn't need anyone's permission or to go through anybody to change it. You call your lawyer, you say, I want to replace this person with that person, you're done.
Yep.
So this was very weird. And so there's some speculation here about why, but again, this is what we could find. It sounds like this is why the co-conservators thought, no way, like you shouldn't have access to this. And at this hearing, her attorney makes it clear, Britney's attorney makes it clear, that they're still going to investigate the alleged abuses and financial mismanagement that she accused Jamie of during earlier hearings, as well as the wrongdoing of others. Because, we've talked about in the Britney episode, it wasn't just Jamie who was a conservator at any one point in time. There were also other organizations with him, her management team, even that it looks like there might have been some shady dealings, because Jamie wasn't operating as a standalone person, right? He had other companies, he had other people helping him do things. And specifically allegations of surveillance and even forced birth control, which again, we go into more detail on our episode, but that has been raised. So they're still going to look into this stuff. So even with this, there's a court filing pending with a request to depose Jamie and retrieve materials related to the alleged surveillance of Britney. And her lawyer hired forensic accountants to look into how he used her money while running the conservatorship. So just because essentially what we want to get across is just because the conservatorship is now terminated doesn't mean all these other things are going to stop too. That's still ongoing. Mm-hmm. And then there was another December hearing earlier this month where Britney essentially was able to get the power to execute her own documents and agreements, which it's crazy to say that it took a separate hearing to get this.
Right. It also sounds so trivial too, right? Because so many, like, we all, you know, for the most part, have the ability to like sign our own leases and sign our own, car agreement. I don't even, is that called a lease as well?
Lease? Yeah, if you're
that's a lease too. Okay.
Unless you're paying all cash, I guess.
Yeah. Whatever, those documents that like you get on day-to-day basis, most of us can just sign them so freely, but people like didn't even think about the fact that as a result of her being in this conservatorship, she couldn't enter into any of agreements on her own self.
Yeah, no contracts
on her own self. I think we understand.
On behalf of herself. Nicole, you just need a little tequila shot to get you awake. That's all you need, girl.
It's crazy as I'm over here like drinking tea, but end of year, guys. Bear with us.
That's the problem. We need the tequila to get us awake. Yeah, no, but you're exactly right. Like that's the most. This is just, there's so many heartbreaking parts of this, but that is one of them. And she couldn't even enter into her own contract. She had to ask her dad for permission, essentially. And it's worth noting at the same hearing, her attorney says that Jamie has been avoiding depositions and hasn't cooperated with requests for documents regarding his possible abuse.
Shocking.
I will say his attorneys claim that they've turned over, I think they said hundreds of thousands of documents and all this stuff, but I couldn't help but think it sounded like a data dump, which is something that we've talked about before too, where essentially like if someone's being investigated and, the prosecution or the plaintiff is looking for information through the discovery process at trial, discovery process is what it sounds like, where you're discovering facts and evidence. So you can make requests for documents. Sometimes what will happen is, if you might have, or it doesn't have to be, but I think that if you know that there's some incriminating stuff in your possession, what you can do is just overload the other side with like tons and tons of documents, hoping that it'll just kind of get drowned. And then it'll be like, a needle in a haystack, because if it's like one sentence on one page and you send 500,000 pages, maybe they won't see it. But anyways, so recently Britney's been speaking out against other wrongdoings against her too. She claimed that her father forced her to do the interview in 2003 with Diane Sawyer when Britney was just 21 years old.
I feel like everybody's turning on Diane Sawyer right now because first of all, I agree that Diane Sawyer did a very nasty interview with Britney. Like we all know, when she basically talks about the allegations about her cheating on Justin, etc., all of that. And you can tell this girl's super fragile. But even I saw, because I'm petty and I like to like, just do a little like Instagram discoveries. No. But so Katie Couric was going and liking all of these comments on Instagram that were like
really
criticizing Diane Sawyer. And it was like, wow, this is so petty, but I love it.
It makes sense. She's like, there can only be one. You're out.
Listen, I was always a Katie Couric fan. Let me say, Team Katie.
That makes sense. All right. Well, it's not looking good for Diane. And she hasn't spoken out about it, right?
She hasn't said anything. Nope.
I will say that I saw that Jamie, Britney's dad, did say that he had nothing to do with it, that he wasn't even involved, wasn't even really talking to Britney at that time.
I have a hard time believing that.
I mean, web of lies, just lies after lies.
Yeah.
Tell us what's the latest though? What's the next thing here?
Well, so Britney has a hearing set on January 19th in 2022. So I guess we're like a month out at this point, to address certain financial and accounting matters as she like takes back control of her estate. And so namely, the court will review expenses tied to the conservatorship and decide whether or not they should be approved. And so it's worth noting the court will actually typically defer to the professionals, but will also like be looking for misconduct, especially given kind of the attention around this one and how long she was obviously under the conservatorship. And so there's one current issue in specific that they'll be reviewing. And so there are fees being charged by Jamie and Lynn, Britney's mom's law firms, which total over $2 million, plus the compensation that Jamie is requesting for his work as conservator. As a reminder, that's $16,000 a month, plus approximately $2,000 a month for his office expenses. Mm-hmm. So note that once courts have signed off on fees, it's hard to challenge financial decisions made during the time. But if there's evidence that a conservator misled the court or that there was any wrongdoing, basically the court will investigate. So in this scenario, they're really kind of looking into these expenses and deciding whether to approve them or not. Mm-hmm. So, we'll see how far Britney will want to go into challenging her dad's decisions while he was conservator. But I think the writing is on the wall that this is far from over and that there are still a lot of questions involving whether he did any, whether there was any misconduct on her part or overspending or just taking her money altogether. And so, while we're obviously happy with the progress that's been made so far, right? The conservatorship is terminated and she'll definitely be out of it. There's still, I think, a long journey to come in terms of Britney's ultimate freedom and kind of righting the wrongs that have been done to her by Jamie.
Right. Yep. Completely agree. Speaking of righting some wrongs.
Oh God. Who's righting wrongs this time?
We can't leave 2021 without going back to our girl, Mrs. El Chapo.
The original gangster of them all. Only second to Patrizia Gucci.
The cartel crew. For real. These mob wives. I mean, Patrizia.
She wasn't even a mob wife.
She acts like one. She's Gucci for life.
She did.
You're like, what? You're not even a mobster. You're like a fashion house.
I hope she's got that tatted somewhere.
I'm sure she does. We got to go back to that because our girl, Mrs. El Chapo, has there's some new stuff, my friend.
Go for it. Tell us
a little refreshers. If you guys have not listened to our El Chapo episode, please, that's probably one of my favorite.
It was episodes. A really good one.
That one and Patrizia really are some just crazy individuals. But anyway, Mrs. El Chapo, Emma Coronel Aispuro, aka Mrs. El Chapo for our purposes. She is the wife of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who has infamously run the Sinaloa cartel for almost 30 years, people. And if you have never heard of him, you've been living under a rock, where actually El Chapo wishes he was right now, because he's tried to escape. He's known essentially for having escaped prison a couple times.
Just a few.
Just a couple. He's big on the tunnels. And essentially, he was extradited from Mexico to the U.S. and was ultimately convicted of federal drug, weapons, and money laundering charges. He gets life plus 30 years, where he's currently serving out that sentence in Colorado. Mm-hmm. He ends up having to forfeit $12.6 billion, although unclear if he actually was in possession of that much. So don't know if the government ever got that. But after the trial, Mrs. El Chapo tries out becoming a social media influencer and even appears on a reality show called Cartel Crew. Don't ask if you don't know what we're talking about. Go listen to that episode. It is ridiculous. And in February of 2021, this year, she voluntarily surrendered to U.S. authorities for a couple charges: conspiracy to unlawfully import and distribute illegal drugs and being an accomplice thereto, and aiding her husband in his 2015 escape from prison via a tunnel. Please go listen to our episode. And his attempted escape in 2016. I'm sorry, I'm just picturing El Chapo on that motorized bike, not actually pedaling.
I think that was a favorite thing, your favorite thing that you learned this year.
This little Mexican man on a bike being dragged with a rope for a mile is just beautiful. There was some speculation that she had already entered into a cooperation agreement with the U.S. government prior to her turning herself in, essentially where she had agreed to provide information in exchange for leniency in her own case. She's ultimately detained without bond because she's seen as a flight risk, as she has access to presumably a lot of money, being, Mrs. El Chapo. And at the time, she was looking at 10 years to life plus a $10 million fine.
Casual.
That's where we last left off. Now, Nicole, where are we at?
Well, so in November this year, last month, she enters into a plea deal and pled guilty to 3 federal offenses. The first one was knowingly and willingly conspiring to distribute heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine for several years. And so specifically, she actually admits to helping move at least 450 kilograms of cocaine, 90 kilograms of heroin, and almost 90,000 kilograms of marijuana into the United States over the years, which the government noted actually made her a minimal participant compared to the larger cartel scheme, of course, right? So imagine all of the kilograms that we just said that she helped move and that making her be considered a minimal participant.
That tells you how big the cartel is, huh?
Crazy.
That's what they're doing.
So second charge that she pled guilty was money laundering conspiracy charge. And then the third was engaging in transactions with a foreign narcotics trafficker. And so Emma ultimately gets sentenced to 3 years in prison and agreed to turn over approximately $1.5 million and would be subject to 4 years of supervised release once she's, out of prison. And so there had been speculation that part of her plea would include ratting out other members of the Sinaloa cartel. But according to court papers, she's only cooperated with the government in the prosecution of her own case and no one else. And her attorney noted, in quotes, "I don't know if she can ever go back to her home in Mexico." So seemingly, even though she ratted out herself, that's enough to put her in hot water and not be able to go kick it with a cartel any longer.
Yeah, I don't know. The damage is done, huh?
I think so.
I'm sure, I wonder if you'd believe it if you're part of the cartel, right? I would be very why did you even go to the US? You could have stood here, da, da, da. Like, if I'm the cartel. The flip side is her husband had a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
And what do you do when your husband's taken away and there's going to be a vie for power, especially with Los Chapalitos, as we've talked about, his 3 sons? Who knows what kind of relationship she had with them? I just feel like she was put in such a tough spot.
I mean, at that point, who even wants to go back? I'm sure, obviously, if her family's still there, of course you miss home, but it has to be so dangerous there for her with, everything that's happened. Then I would be honestly, just fuck it. Maybe right. Prison is the safest place for me.
All right. I do think of Game of Thrones. I forgot if you said that in reference to this or something else, but in this episode. But I feel like if you're married to the king and the king is beheaded and taken out, you're like, oh, I can't be here. I'm not going to be the next king. I got to go.
I'm leaving the fuck out.
Yeah, you can't stay. There's going to be a vie for power. Get out of there.
Agreed.
I hear it's pretty tough right now too, because it's the Sinaloa cartel, obviously one of the most dangerous cartels in the world. It's his 3 sons and then his BFF who are trying to keep it together, but that was probably hanging by a thread. So yeah. Anyway, good luck, girl. Hopefully you find really good witness protection afterward, because I'm real worried about you. I'm not gonna lie.
Maybe Dr. Dre can pay her security expenses as well.
Maybe he's feeling really generous. Maybe catch him in a good mood, girl.
Yeah, good luck.
Oh man. And then we have one more kind of update, non-update, right? We can't end this episode without talking about Travis Scott and the Astroworld Festival tragedy. So, we put together a really extensive episode about where things were at the time we recorded, because there has just been so much information coming out since then, where I feel like one day passes and it's already old news about what happened the day prior, because there's so many more claims coming out. There's so many more plaintiffs coming out. And so unfortunately, we have to report that since our last episode, one more person has passed away from Astroworld. There's now in total 10 people who have sadly passed away. And it's so sad. And of course, hundreds have been injured. And we wanted to be very thoughtful in the update that we do give, especially, considering the gravity of the situation. And we are continuing to monitor the situation and really want to do a separate episode once we have more information. Right now, so many things have changed. And in some ways, not many things have changed, because we're seeing so many lawsuits that have very similar claims by different plaintiffs. And so what Nicole and I want to do is give it some time before we fully report on where things are. We want to see kind of how the courts treat these things. As of right now, of course, all of the defendants, so Travis Scott, Live Nation, they're all lawyering up. Everybody's lawyered up, essentially. They're in the courts. Travis Scott has asked for a dismissal of several lawsuits, but we want the courts to kind of weigh in on these complaints before we really speak to them. But we can say, as of now, there are hundreds of lawsuits or over 100 lawsuits that are out. There are hundreds of plaintiffs, multiple class action lawsuits. And I think the total ask is well into the billions at this point in terms of wanting financial compensation from all the defendants as a whole. Nicole, I don't know if I missed anything. Feel free to chime in.
No, I think you got it all. There's just so many people and with very similar claims and a lot of money on the line right now, but there's also so many defendants to sort through, as we talked about in our episode, between Live Nation, Travis, the park, the security companies, even Drake is named in a few of them. So like Alexa said, I just think, we both think that given the gravity of all of this and how serious these things are, we really want to make sure we've taken the time to kind of get into some of these updates, especially once the court has had an opportunity to weigh in, so that we can come back to you guys with a really well thought out kind of response and update. But this is all to say that we're definitely tracking the situation, and we're just curious to see how this all turns out. There's so much there.
All right. Well, with that, those are our 2021 updates, my friend. So that kicks off a great first year for the Legally Judgy podcast.
Yeah.
We want to get into our next segment, our last one of 2021, our Q&A. So in honor of it being our last episode, we're going to answer 2 questions we received this year, because we specifically asked for 2021 questions, and these are the ones that we got. So we want to make sure we answer these this year. So one question we received from a judgy was, what's the first thing they teach you in law school? And you wonderful, wonderful judgy, we are old. It's been years since my first year in law school. I wish I could remember. I will say the lasting impression, one of the big lasting impressions I have from law school was the Socratic Method. I don't think I was as familiar with that method of teaching, in quotation marks, before I went to law school, but essentially it's basically where a professor will ask a question to a random student. So he'll, in my experience, I think in my first year, there was only one professor, thank God, that practiced with the Socratic Method. And he would give the fact pattern. He would ask the question. You would have he wouldn't call on you. So you didn't know it was coming to you. So you're on the edge of your seat the entire time, because you're just focusing on please don't call me. Please don't call me. Please don't call me. He would ask the question, and then it'd be like, Alexa, please answer the question. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm on the spot. But then I was so focused on it being me that I'm like, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. I actually don't know if we ever talked about this, and I have people who can back this up for me, but I got cold called 23 times in contracts first semester of law school.
You counted?
People started keeping count, because at a certain point, okay, so typically, FYI, into law school, typically only at least at Penn, per class, you would get maybe a person or 2, maybe 3 people who get cold called a day, because obviously the professors are teaching, right? And they're going through cases. And so there's so much happening that only so many people can get cold called per day. But for some fucking reason, this professor cold called me 23 times that semester.
Wow. He liked you, huh?
It was a lady. Thank you.
He liked you, huh?
I did not like her. So I don't know.
Uh-oh. Not very feminist of her.
Let me say, the first thing that they taught us in law school, so I remember at least, and I'm actually curious because these are the same classes that you had. My first semester classes were torts, contracts, civil procedures, aka Civ Pro.
I hate that. Yeah.
And then we had
Crim.
Crim? No, I had crim second semester. But we did have this legal writing class, and then it had a seminar attached to it. So that was my first year, my first semester, first year kind of course load.
Torts was my second semester, I think. That was inverted. So I did crim first.
Okay.
I remember liking crim. I was like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, crim was interesting.
I guess the other thing one of the first things too was I don't know, I can't remember what the professors taught me, but I remember the tips that I received was outlining, right? Because it was a specific way of taking notes and then studying for exams. There's one big exam at the end of the year, and that determines your entire grade. Or sorry, at the end of the semester.
Literally.
And so you're supposed to outline. Don't ask me what that is. I still don't understand it. But no, you're outlining all the cases that you've studied and read for that semester to ultimately be able to write essays essentially on like fact patterns. Terrible. So that's what we learned. It's not as exciting, I'm sure, to non-lawyers.
This is not even fun.
No,
No, I'm sure nobody wants to hear about this. If you want to hear more about this, feel free to directly DM us and we'll answer you.
Yeah, I think they were hoping for something really juicy
Nope.
and legalese. The first thing I learned was that I didn't like civil procedure. I'll tell you that. I was like, I do not want to become a litigator. It's like, it sounds really boring and I don't care about any of this.
Agreed.
All right. The next question we got that we want to make sure we answer this year is, who is y'all's dream podcast guest? That's a pretty good question.
You go first.
Kim Kardashian.
Can I tell you what's so funny? I was thinking Kanye. So I feel like we're on exact opposite wavelengths right now.
That makes sense.
Why Kim?
I have so many questions for her. One, how does it feel passing the baby bar the fourth time?
Also, can we just clarify, right?
We're upset.
Because I feel like I've seen so many people being like, oh my God, congrats, Kim's an attorney. Like, Kim is not a fucking attorney. The baby bar exam is an exam that you take at the end of your first year, in air quotes, of law school, people who don't actually go to school. So she still has many studies left to do and still has to take the real bar exam, which is a 3-day in-person exam if you live in California. And so she's not an attorney. Now go ahead. What questions do you have for her?
Better, my friend. It's now 2 days in California too.
Oh, is it 2 now?
I was the second to last cohort to have to take the 3-day exam. Yeah, I was super happy and thrilled when it got changed to 2.
I'm sure.
Yes, good point though. And to that end, because we're petty and judgy here, everybody who on the Instagram poll said that you'd rather be repped by her over us, just keep what Nicole said in mind. When
bitches, she's not even a real attorney.
You just called like 14% of our Judgies bitches, but for Judgy, to expect that from us at this point,
I was gonna say, I mean, if you listen to us, you know our vibes.
To be fair, Nicole and I call each other a bitch like at least
all the time
a day, but it's usually like, bitch.
If it makes you feel any better, this is one of those moments that I've talked about where I like look back and I regret it. I was FaceTiming with my cousin today, and my aunt and my grandma arrived for the holidays. And so we were FaceTiming. She turned the camera around. I was like, what's up, bitches? And I was like, wow, I just called my aunt and my grandma bitches. So
you did?
Well, I swear to God, I did. I think they were like so flustered from coming in off of like driving down that they were like, okay.
They're like 2 years in quarantine. She's become uncultured swine.
I know. I'm sorry, guys. I just call everybody bitches.
No, that was funny. So Kim K, I'm just so, it was in part a joke, but in part, if she was like, yeah, first of all, she's really famous. So that would make our podcast pretty famous.
Okay.
It's completely self-interested.
Not self-serving at all.
Almost everything I do is self-serving. Second of all, she's self-serving, so we would really get along. And I would just like, I want to pick her brain about like why law. Like, I know it's tied to her dad, but I want to know practically, like, given the businesses that you have, what is the intrigue into law, and like, what do you actually plan on doing with, presuming you become barred? What do you like? Are you going to practice full time? Like, are you going to give up on your other businesses? Are you going to let them be managed by other people? Like, I just want to know, because, not when we first started talking about doing a podcast together, we actually thought we would interview ex-lawyers, right? That was the original idea behind our
ridiculous.
Podcast. So different. Who would
ridiculous?
Here is like the opposite, right? She's already a really successful entrepreneur. She's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she wants to become a lawyer. I mean, let's be real. You and I are hoping to do the opposite. We want to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars and not practice.
And not practicing, never talking with the law again.
So I want to ask her, like, maybe you don't, I want to also warn her, like, maybe you don't realize what it's like to practice law, or maybe it's a privilege. Maybe it's better for her because she doesn't need to do it.
She'll still, when she feels like it, like once a month, she'll pretend to be a lawyer.
Take on a case.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking in our Judgy's defense, who did vote for her, I was thinking like, hey, maybe I would go for her because she's so rich. Like, she would be able to
represent you for free.
A lot of or pay for the resources I need to, win my case.
Yeah.
Anyway, talk about why you want Kanye.
Well, first of all, that we are a big Kanye household. Not new Kanye, brand new Kanye is a bit much, but Kanye
to be specific.
Fuck, certainly not MAGA Kanye. But Kanye back in the day Kanye's still a genius, I think, musically, and he always will be. But I think Kanye back in the day had like a je ne sais quoi to him that just made him very.
I'm looking at you like you're so obnoxious. Je ne sais quoi. That's why you and Kanye would get along, and me and Kim would be basic bitches over here. Like, so what's your workout routine?
I knew that she would love me saying je ne sais quoi. So, anyways, Kanye had like something to him. He was just like so creative and just always thinking of new things and like really kind of changing art and culture, all of that. So old Kanye, I am certainly a huge fan of. But I also think that you just never know what you're going to get when you talk to Kanye, which I love. Like, I love a good surprise element to things. You know what I mean? And so, like, I just think he would be so interesting. Like, who the fuck would know? Who would know, like, what he discloses that day, who he hates, who he loves? Is he still trying to win Kim back? Is he over her? Like, I'm just here for the tea.
I would genuinely try to have a conversation with him, but I feel like we wouldn't be having the same conversation.
No, we'd be on a different planet.
I would ask him a question. I swear, I imagine him like all of a sudden talking about outer space. I'm like, what? I didn't ask about that at all. Like, what are we talking about? I think I'd just be so confused the entire time.
It's fine. It would be worth it.
I mean, you're definitely a bigger Kanye fan. I do like old Kanye, but I just can't get past the new Kanye. It's very, I have a love hate. Anyway, we don't need to sit on that anymore. Moving into our special Patreon content, people, if you are not signed up with our Patreon, go sign up because you're missing out on a lot. Okay, Judgies, don't forget, tell your friends, your families, your baristas, your school teachers, your innkeepers, your gatekeepers, tell all the keepers about Legally Judgy, please. We really want to go out with a bang in 2021. We want to welcome 2022 with a bang. And that means getting more Judgies involved in our show. Of course, reach out if you have any topics for suggestion for next year. We'll happily take it. Always feel to reach out with questions, anything. We can't stress it enough to reach out with any and all thoughts. We're always here. With that being said, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Legally Judgy. We hope you enjoyed listening to us talk as much as we love the sound of our own voices.
If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Also, join us on our Patreon for more judgy shits and giggles. Until next time.
Bye.